welcome to the PIPCast Podcast, a programming arm of Pass in Publishing. We post bi-weekly on Substack and our YouTube channel. We're your hosts, Rachael Levay and Allegra Martschenko, and in this, our second episode, we are going to be talking about what makes for a good interview. Pass in Publishing is a free mentorship program meant to aid early career folk in scholarly publishing with the work of locating, applying to, and negotiating new positions. So this week, we are talking about interviews. Allegra, what makes for a good interview?
Well, I think you and I have talked a fair bit about sort of querying that word good and trying to think about equitable ways to approach interviewing in general. For instance, UPC for our first interview provides the questions beforehand for people to review because we don't want nerves to knock anyone out of the running who really has great ideas that we want to add to our organization. So trying to break down what good means into are there specific traits we're looking for in this job has been really helpful for us. Are we valuing early career people? Are we valuing people who can show big picture thinking? Are we valuing people who have talk well about working with other departments in the organization or something like that? Having that breakdown on the side of the interviewer, I think, is very helpful for trying to be a little bit more fair in how you're evaluating people. So you're not just elevating the people who speak really well. And then on the side of the interviewee, I feel like that's also a good question that you can ask essentially at the end of the interview, like, what does success look like in this position? Or by scouring the job description or the website, you might be able to find an answer for yourself before you even go into the interview, and being equipped with some of those answers for how you might want to tailor your responses to questions and stuff like that, I think can help you feel a little bit better about yourself and be a little bit less nervous and give that good interview.
Yeah. I really like one of the points that you were making there, which is that I think oftentimes there's an assumption that a good interview is up to the interviewee to make happen. But I oftentimes realize when I'm kind of in an interview situation that the interviewer actually does a ton to set the tone. And so I think, like, as much as we're here at PIP, like a space for early career folks who are preparing to move into interview spaces and looking for jobs, I would love to see resources develop for interviewers about how to do that work better. Because I do think that sharing questions up front is such a good thing for interviewers to do, because like we do the same work, Allegra. Like, how much of the time are we required to think on our feet, like in that fast, immediate way? I mean, we're always like preparing and bringing things together, and it feels like interviews should reflect that. And so that said, I think one of the things for me that really makes a good interview is a sense that it's a conversation, that the interviewer is kind of looking at us as much as we're looking at them, and that, which is a really hard thing to do, right? To like figure out how to not be so nervous that you can just have a conversation. But I think that really helps kind of us see what sort of a colleague somebody's going to be, and vice versa, like for them to see what sort of colleagues we're going to be. And I think in a lot of the interviews I've been part of, that conversational quality makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's definitely, I would say, at least for me, there's never like a true right answer to a question. I always really appreciate someone in some ways being able to just think through a question live on the call, and that's super nerve-wracking. And again, as an interviewee, it's always really great to have some like touchstone things that you can refer back to no matter what question is thrown at you, especially if you don't get the questions beforehand, like specific examples in your work or goals for your future or philosophies that you can touch back on in various questions. But being able to sort of connect things from previous questions to your current question, or connect things from the organization or that one of your interviewers has said to what you're actively thinking about, even if it's not like the most wildly eloquent answer, I think shows an ability to sort of think on your feet, but also a curiosity about the
Yeah.
position, about the organization, and openness to evolving in the position and evolving with the organization. And I think that goes a long way towards that conversational feel.
Hmm.
And even when your interviewer isn't really making it feel like that much of a conversation, like they're just asking you the question and stuff like that. I think a small thing to do is to ask them a little
Hmm.
question here. You can ask them to clarify their question. You can ask them a question after you've given your answer, and just allow them to sort of, in some ways, expand a bit more on their own organization, so that when you answer additional questions, you are not just parroting back that language, but you're in conversation with the values of the organization.
Yeah. I think that's a really savvy piece of advice there. Um, I also have really appreciated when people could have through lines through their answers,
Hmm.
that they're, I guess, sharing with us their ethos of the type of colleague that they are,
Hmm.
the priorities for them in the work that we do. Um, and kind of bring a little bit of that to each part of the interview. It gives it much more of a sense of a whole rather than these kind of individual siloed questions.
Hmm.
Um, and that, I think, really helps contribute as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like overly intricate. You don't need to be laying out your manifesto for doing
Totally.
work in publishing. It's something as simple as like you find that you work well in a team environment, and
Hmm.
talking in a couple of your questions about how teamwork works well for you, or how you work well in a team, or how communication and collaboration are important to you at an
Yeah.
organization, and how you sort of exhibit those qualities also just sorts of gives an interviewer a general sense of what's important to you.
Yeah.
And I think like looking for the not just good answers, but is this a person who has some topics that are important to them,
Hmm.
that will bring something to an organization, is something we look for. And
Yeah.
I think it's most important to be like honest about what's important to you, but you can also sort of repeat back or reflect back a little
Hmm.
bit of the job board language. If the job
Totally.
description says you have to work well in a team environment, parroting that back is a good move there. If they say you have to do specific tasks, you can reference these specific tasks. You can talk about, I don't know, right? We're in acquisition, so I keep
Yeah.
biased to acquisition tasks, but like writing board memos is something that's listed on the job description. You can talk about how you approach board memos, but if you're ever given a platform to talk about some of your more specific work and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that, like, everybody who's hiring or on a hiring committee has like a different lens that they're
Hmm.
bringing to reading through it. And over the last couple of hires we've had at UPC, it's been fascinating to see like how each of us as individuals approach the cover letters and like what made things stand out. But I think broadly speaking, from that job board language, like really talking about the job itself, like
Hmm.
in some specific detail, the lists, be sure to mention a couple of books that you like, because somebody on that hiring committee is always going to be just thrilled to see a book that's talked about. And bonus points if it's not like the newest, most exciting book. I feel
Hmm.
like if it's a little bit more backlist, a little bit less flashy, that person on the hiring committee is going to be even more excited because it kind of shows like more interest in the deeper scholarly stuff and not necessarily the newest titles. And I think that that can go a really long ways, and in terms of utilizing that job board language in specific ways related to the list.
Yeah, I think that becomes increasingly important, like the more
Mhm.
senior a position you're looking for, like the
Yeah.
difference in what we're looking for when an editorial assistant can talk about a press versus an acquisitions editor who's going to be coming on with the press and like needs to
Yeah.
talk about the list areas is definitely different. But I also know kind of annoying. Like I know that deeply personalizing
Totally.
your cover letters for every job you apply to, especially when you're applying to a ton of jobs, is super extremely annoying. But I think that there's stuff that you can do that hopefully doesn't take too much time.
Yeah.
Like each cover letter takes an additional 15-20 minutes of personalization or something like that, and you look over the website. I like to reflect back an agency, a press's mission. Like if they have
Hmm.
specific language about their mission, I like to essentially throw that into the cover letter. If they have any
Yeah.
new initiatives, I always think that's really exciting when someone says, oh, I noticed that you're doing like a lot of work on open access or something like that, or I noticed that like you do a lot of co-publication stuff, distribution titles and stuff, which just shows both familiarity with what those things are. Like, now I know that you know what open access is. Now I know you know what distribution titles are. But also shows a bit of excitement, like maybe those are things and projects that you're going to come on at the press and you're going to work with us on, and that gives us like a good focal point for remembering you. You know, this is a person who is really excited about open access and could do some great things if they came on and stuff like that.
And just a little shout out here to our Term Tuesday on Twitter. If you don't know what distributions or co-pubs or open access are with a lot of specificity, we have a lot of those terms on our Term Tuesday on Twitter, and are a resource as well if you need to learn a little bit more on the fly about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I definitely think presses over the last couple of years have been putting a lot more effort into their DEIJ statements. That's the acronym we use at UPC: diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Most presses use different variations of language in those initiatives, but it's a good thing to reference as well, especially if you're interested and invested in those issues. And it seems like the press is as well. It's useful to put that in your cover letter.
Yeah, definitely. And even beyond just your written materials or anything like that, because I guess we are supposed to be focusing on the interview and straight a little bit to the cover letter, but we always do. I think asking, we talk about this all the time, but asking great questions in an interview is like, I don't think I realized until we had our last hire how much I value that, until essentially we had a candidate who just asked like an amazing kind of endless stream of questions, and they like
could have gone on forever.
Skyrocketed to the top of our list because we were like, this is someone who's genuinely curious about the organization. Again, that can kind of think on their feet, or at least makes it seem like it if they have a very extensive list of questions just off screen, or someone who's prepared, who came with this list of questions and is genuinely curious about things. And again, somewhat unfortunately, it's the personalized questions that are most interesting. It's asking about a specific thing that press is doing. And there's some sort of good general questions you can ask anywhere. What does success look like in this position? What is the teamwork environment like? Stuff like that. But getting a bit more tailored, or demonstrating knowledge of the industry. Like if you ask, how does your board of trustees work? How does your editorial board work? Now I know this is someone who knows how a press tends to work. You know, this is someone who knows that we have an editorial board and our books have to be approved there. So asking wonderful questions can, I think, also do a ton, especially if you're a little bit unsure about your answers to the questions that get asked to you. If you're just like not quite confident that they're amazing answers, again, you'll really get set apart if you ask those wonderful questions.
And it's kind of like a strange thing that happens in that portion of the interview, where I really loved when I felt like we were being interviewed by the interviewees. Like it, because like there are some questions that feel like perfunctory, you know, like the success question, like what does success look like? Or that are kind of questions that are meant to sort of support the candidate's profile in the interview space. And then to get questions that we had to like think about and really try to sell ourselves as an organization was just super refreshing. And I suspect that other organizations would feel the same way. So like, and it's also fair in that space to ask some questions about like the job itself specifically, or what the organization can offer, which is tricky. Like, I'm trying to remember, Allegra, did we have anyone of late who'd asked us kind of specific questions about like leave or salary?
No.
Like how would somebody handle questions like that?
Yeah, that's a good note. And I definitely think that's like a second interview sort of question, but it really pushes at the, you know, sometimes you're afraid that it's like going to scare your interviewer off, but when you're phrasing it as also a question and not a demand, again, this is really a space for the interviewer to perform, you know, and to try to sell themselves to you. So if you're saying at the end, can you talk a little bit more about your total compensation package? I don't mean just salary. Can you also talk about like your leave program, your benefits and stuff like that? I would love to know all of that information. They should answer you, you know, and how they answer you can also indicate what sort of workplace environment it is. people have great things to say about and you get multiple answers, people have
Yeah.
great things to say about how much leave they have and stuff like that. And you hear it from a couple of people, that maybe gives you a good sense that the employees at this place are happy. If you get a very sort of stiff, formal answer that they're trying to make clear that there's no room for negotiation, I don't know, maybe that
Yeah.
puts you off a little bit. Their presses have constraints, but the way they deliver this information,
Yep.
and again, the way they sell themselves to you can really give you a good sense of how people talk to each other internally.
Yeah. That's such a good point, because I think as an interviewee, you can learn a lot about that tone that is being put out. And I think we've also had a number of candidates from multiply marginalized identities who've asked us, like, how does your organization support like BIPOC, LGBTQ staff? Like, what are your accessibility or disability policies? And I think those are really good questions. Again, like sort of second interview questions, I would think. But like as a candidate, I'm sure folks want to find that information out and asking it directly and seeing how people respond. Like, I felt like for me as an interviewer, that's important information to share. And I've been part of interviews in the past where it felt sort of like a secondary thought, like, oh gosh, how do we? And I think that's important information for people to have as well.
Yeah, that's another one of those points where it's an interviewee I have the thing about it every time I say interviewee, but an interviewee can and should ask these questions because they're important to you. They'll affect your day-to-day working life. It's not something that like you want sprung up on you a couple months down the line when you realize actually this place isn't a good fit for you. But also interviewers can do a lot of work to provide that information in an easily, readily available manner. Like I know for my interview at UPC, you guys provided your like DEIJ strategic goals and stuff like that and your plans, and you said like, we're not going to quiz you on any of this, but we think that you should know like what our goals are, what our plans are, the kind of organization that we are, and if you have any questions about it, like please do ask them. So being able to provide information on the front end when you're interviewing people, I think that you'll be really surprised what excellent like responses you get from your candidates. It shouldn't just be on them to bring stuff up. And I think some people get a little bit afraid, like you're cheating if you give people answers beforehand, or you're not actually getting like who they are and what they think. But like Rachel said, you pretty much always get a chance to prepare for to prepare for a project, an interview, a presentation. So you should get that same chance here. And your conversations tend to be much deeper and much richer if the other person, has had a chance to organize their thoughts and can respond in turn, and you can go back and forth a little bit because they haven't been put on the spot.
That transparency, I think, makes for a much more productive conversation.
But maybe we should wrap up the topic of interviews. I am not sure what our next topic will be.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be great, though.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be fantastic, and you should definitely tune in when it comes out.
And we will see you there.
Yes, we will. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for listening. You can find us on Twitter at PathsonPub, or check out our website, www.pathsonpublishing.wordpress.com. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.